Jesus talked about money more than heaven and hell combined. In fact, 16 of his 38 parables deal directly with money and possessions. So, if you've ever wondered what God really thinks about your bank account, your debt, or that financial anxiety keeping you up at night, you're about to find out. Because what Jesus actually said about money might completely change how you handle your finances. Let's start with the elephant in the room. Many of us grew up thinking that God wants us poor, or that money is somehow evil. But here's what Jesus actually said in Matthew 6:19. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. Notice he didn't say, don't have money. He said, don't store up treasures on earth. There's a massive difference. Jesus is talking about where your heart is, not your bank balance. He's concerned with your relationship to money, not the money itself. In the very next verse, he explains, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. This isn't about being broke, it's about perspective. It's about understanding that money is a tool, not a master. Think about it this way. You probably have a hammer in your toolbox. That hammer isn't evil, but if you started worshipping that hammer, building your identity around it, losing sleep over it, that would be a problem. Jesus is teaching us the same principle about money. Now, let's get practical. How does this play out in real life? First, let's talk about the anxiety that comes with money. In Matthew 6:25, Jesus says, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. He goes on to talk about how God feeds the birds and clothes the flowers. But here's what's beautiful about this passage. Jesus isn't being naive about real financial needs. He's addressing the worry that consumes us, the kind of worry that makes us make poor decisions. When you're anxious about money, you either hoard it out of fear or spend it impulsively to feel better. Neither approach works. Jesus is saying, when you trust that God cares about your needs, you can make wise, calm decisions with your money instead of emotional ones. Let me give you a practical example. Sarah, a single mum in our community, was drowning in credit card debt. Every night, she'd lie awake calculating and recalculating her bills. Then she started applying this principle. Instead of lying there worrying, she'd pray about her situation and ask God for wisdom. That peace allowed her to think clearly. She created a budget, called her creditors to negotiate payment plans, and picked up a part-time job. The anxiety was paralyzing her, but trusting God freed her to take action. Now let's look at what Jesus said about earning money. In the parable of the talents in Matthew 25, Jesus tells a story about a master who gives his servants different amounts of money to invest. 2 of them double their money, and the master praises them, saying, well done, good and faithful servant. The 3rd servant buries his money in the ground out of fear, and the master is not pleased. This parable teaches us that God actually wants us to be productive with what He's given us. Whether that's your job, your skills, or your actual money, we're called to stewardship, not passivity. If you have a gift for graphic design, use it. If you're good with numbers, develop that skill. If you have some savings, invest it wisely. God isn't honored by wasted potential or buried talents. But here's where it gets really interesting. Jesus also talks about generosity in a way that completely flips our normal thinking. In Luke 6:38 he says, give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. Some people have turned this into a formula, give to get rich. But that misses the point entirely. Jesus is teaching us that generosity creates abundance, not scarcity. When you hold money tightly out of fear, it controls you. When you give generously, you demonstrate that you trust God with your needs. And something amazing happens. You stop being afraid of not having enough. I've seen this principle work in countless lives. My friend David was making good money but felt broke all the time because he was so focused on accumulating more. He started tithing 10% of his income, and something shifted. Not because God magically gave him more money, but because giving broke his fear-based relationship with money. He started budgeting better, spending more intentionally, and actually enjoying what he had instead of always wanting more. Let's talk about debt for a moment, because this is where many of us struggle. In Romans 13:8, Paul writes, "Let no debt remain outstanding, except the continuing debt to love one another." Now, this doesn't mean you can never have a mortgage or a car loan, but it does mean we should take debt seriously and work toward freedom from it. Debt often represents living beyond our means or making decisions based on what we want right now rather than what's wise long term. Here's a practical approach rooted in biblical wisdom. First, stop adding to your debt. Then, list all your debts and attack them systematically. Pay minimums on everything, but put extra money toward either your smallest debt for quick wins or your highest interest debt to save money. The Bible calls us to be wise stewards, and paying high interest rates isn't wise stewardship. While you're paying off debt, practice contentment. In Philippians 4:12, Paul says, "I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation." Contentment isn't settling for less than God's best. It's being grateful for what you have while you work toward what God has called you to. This is huge when it comes to money. Our culture constantly tells us we need more, newer, better, but contentment allows you to enjoy what you have and spend money on what actually matters to you, not what advertisers tell you to want. Now, what about building wealth? Is it okay to want financial security? Look at Proverbs 21:20. "The wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down." This is talking about saving and planning ahead. It's wisdom to have an emergency fund. It's wise to save for retirement. It's good stewardship to build wealth so you can be generous and not a burden to others. But notice the balance here. You save and plan, but you don't hoard out of fear or greed. You build wealth to increase your capacity to love and serve others, not just to make yourself feel secure. Let me share one more principle that's transformed how I think about money. In 1 Timothy 6:17-18, Paul writes to Timothy about the rich. "Command them not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share." Did you catch that? God richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. God isn't against you enjoying good things. He's against good things becoming your God. You can enjoy a nice meal, a beautiful home, or a fun vacation without those things defining your worth or security. The key is gratitude and generosity. When you recognize that everything you have comes from God, you hold it lightly and share it freely. So how do we put all this together? How do we actually live these principles? Start with your heart. Ask yourself, what emotions come up when you think about money? Fear, shame, pride, envy? Bring those to God in prayer. Remember, He cares about your needs more than you do. Next, get practical. Create a budget if you don't have one. Not to restrict yourself, but to direct your money toward what matters most to you. Include giving in that budget, even if it's small. Include saving, even if it's just $20 a month. The amount matters less than the principle. If you have debt, make a plan to eliminate it. If you're already financially stable, ask God how He wants you to be generous with what He's given you. Maybe that's giving to your church, supporting a missionary, or helping a neighbor in need. The goal isn't to follow rules about money. The goal is to let biblical principles transform your relationship with money so that it serves God's purposes in your life instead of controlling you. And here's what I've discovered. When you align your finances with God's principles, something beautiful happens. Money becomes a tool for blessing others and building God's kingdom instead of a source of stress and anxiety. Jesus said in Matthew 6:21, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." The question isn't whether you'll treasure something. You will. The question is what you'll treasure. When you treasure God's kingdom and put His principles first, everything else, including your finances, starts to fall into place. Not because life becomes easy, but because you're finally using money the way God designed it to be used. I'd love to hear how you're applying these principles in your own life. Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this video helped you see money from a biblical perspective, Go ahead and like this video and subscribe for more practical faith content.